Yeah, you're there.
Hello, Sisters in Crime. The Smoking Guns chapter is sponsoring or invited Tori Griffin to give a presentation on the query process, which is very important for anyone trying to have a novel published. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Tori at this. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna just put this here, mostly for my reference. I'll send and make sure everyone has access to these slides later. Just there's nothing critical on them, it's just kind of notes.
Could you please speak loud, please?
Yes. My name is Victoria Griffin. Y'all can call me Tori. I have been an editor since 2016, specializing in queries for a while. I do query critiques and query coaching, which is super fun. Basically one-on-one writing a query together with the author. I'm a represented author myself. I write magical realism and am represented by Sandy Liu, Bookworm Literary Agency. So I've been through this myself, and I've helped a bunch of other people go through it. Since we have a smaller group in here today, we can kind of keep this very casual. If y'all have questions, if there's something that, you know, maybe I'm glazing over, but you really want to dig into, just tell me. We can go from there. So to start, I'd kind of like to get a sense of the room. What is y'all's querying history? Has everyone in here queried? No? Goose egg? You have queried? Okay. So who all has not queried ever? Okay. And
I should probably sit over there because I write. So far I have written all nonfiction, and so I say a query, but really it's that I have, you know, done fairly informal queries followed up by a book proposal, right? Which is more the nonfiction process. But so everything that you have to say about what I consider real querying is still new to me.
Oh, proposals are definitely real querying.
Yes, written for National Geographic.
Yeah.
Not Mad Magazine.
I think Mad Magazine developed my weird sense of humor.
So that's what's wrong.
Mad Magazine and Art Buckle.
And my agent left the industry a little over a year ago. So I'm kind of decided if I want to query or not.
Yeah. Okay, so you're thinking about potentially going indie.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was with Don Moss, so it was kind of a high heart attack. So.
Right. Well, yeah, actually, because this is more from me than y'all at this point. Okay, so we're going to talk about start to signed. This is mostly the process. We're going to talk about writing query letters. Do we have a time that we can shut on? Okay.
We've got donuts. We get hungry. We've got donuts.
We're all set there. As long as we have sugar and everybody's not necessary. Okay, so the first thing that I tend to talk about is the pros and cons of, you know, before you query. Is it the best route for you? Is traditional publication the best route? Because I think we're getting away from that idea that querying is the only way and people just do it by default. But it's still good to think about, and especially to realize that there is no right way. Nothing is inherently better. It's just different. So with traditional publication, support from the agent and the publisher, that's usually the biggest thing. You're looking at probably a cash advance and no upfront costs and potential career opportunities, although that's highly subjective and means different things to different people. So, cons being that it's a long process, you're sacrificing control. There are no guarantees at any point in the game. You can get an agent and go on submission and not get a publisher. You can get an agent, go on submission, get a book deal, and it still fall through. You can get a book deal, the book deal's published, and not get another one. So there are never any guarantees.
Marketing can tell you no.
Yes. Yes. There's always that one. And the royalty percentage is lower, which when you start looking at the finances of it, there are so many facets to that. You get a lower royalty percentage, but theoretically your agent can negotiate a better deal for you. You're sacrificing that agent commission, but you're getting something in return. So again, highly subjective, and a lot of it really just depends on your personal goals and what is the most important to you. Is there a way we can make sure that the Zoom folks are hearing okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got the Zoom feed up so that I can kind of keep an eye on it.
Okay. So no one's saying,
Yes,
please,
yes.
okay. We're good then. Okay, so traditional publication process, just, sorry. Just bare bones. I'm sure everyone in here is probably fairly familiar with the process. So, query agents request a partial or full manuscript. If they like it, set up a phone call, you talk. If they like you, they offer representation. At that point, most agents at this stage of the game are editorial. So after you sign with an agent, you're likely going to go through some rounds of editing. And then when you're both happy with it and ready to do the thing, then the agent sends you on submission, takes your manuscript, sends it to all their contacts at publishers, and hopefully one of them love it, and then they have to go through a bunch of meetings and talk to the marketing people, and if they still love it, then you get a book deal. That's the basics. I'm guessing none of that's new to anyone.
Peter, are you familiar with the process? Yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
Takes about a year, doesn't it?
I generally tell people to expect a year of query, a year on submission, and probably about a year after that, but it depends on the publisher. Of course, there are some people that can query and get an agent in a week. If you know, some people, my agent, I sent her a query. A solid year later, 365 days, she requested the full manuscript.
Yeah, that was my experience too. Yeah.
So it's just, I like to try to warn authors, you know, don't expect it to be quick. Be pleasantly surprised if it takes less time. The other thing that I warn authors about, these statistics are from 2019, the Nelson Literary Agency. So, you know, there's not really an abundance of these statistics, but this is enough to kind of give you an idea. So in 2019, they received 14,000 queries. They signed 14 new clients. So it's success rate of 0.001%.
And that's just one agency.
One agency, yeah. So
what do they usually look at that particular?
well, that Nelson
They're
Literary,
full, right? So they have a lot of agents, so they look for everything.
yeah, that's it. That's across the agency. So that's and I'll send the link to that, the source for that. See a little more. So that's not, you know, I don't want to be a bummer, and I don't want to dissuade people from trying, but I do believe in setting realistic expectations and understanding that this isn't something that's just going to be handed to you. Like, it's good to, you know, authors have to work for it and be able to accept that rejection and handle it and not think, you know, if you get 5 rejections and give up, you're probably not gonna sign with an agent.
Yeah.
I tell usually my threshold is 100 queries. If you send 100 queries and you're still getting crickets, okay, it might be time to move on to the next project. But
J.K. Rowling sent out something like 60. She had 60 rejections or something
Yeah.
on Harry Potter. Yeah.
and that's typical. I mean,
Yeah.
that's very typical.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, the stars have to align.
Yeah.
You have to have the right agent, the right query, the right day. Have they had their coffee? Did they just sign an author who writes something really similar to your stuff? What's going on? You know, we should never write to trends. That's not a good idea. But what is going on in the industry that can make a difference?
About 45 years ago, a woman got an idea for this novel about this terrible thing that had happened to a family. She wrote it on, she didn't know anything about publishing at all. She just wrote it on her electric typewriter, proofread it, put it in an envelope, and sent it to like either Random House or Simon & Schuster. No agent, nothing. She didn't know. So of course it wound up on the desk of a junior editor. Took all these manuscripts home, picked up that one, spent the whole weekend reading it, went to the editor-in-chief and put it on the desk and said, we don't publish this for fools. It was Ordinary People, which was one of the, it wasn't the first movie that Robert Redford directed, it was the second. Timothy Hutton, Mary Tyler Moore, Judd Hirsch, Dr. Sutherland. It was an amazing, it's a horribly sad book. She didn't know anything. She didn't know you weren't supposed to do that. She just sent it.
Sometimes figuring out you're not supposed to do that is a death blow.
Well, and she wrote several others, but I remember reading that in a bio on her before I even thought about trying to write anything myself. And thought, really good decision on their part to publish it because it was a very fine novel.
You know,
A good description I've heard of hearing no more, lots more than yes, as a speaker at, I think it was Thrillfest, and he said, no is the coin of the realm. That's what's passed around, lots more than yes. No is the coin of the realm.
that's, I think one of the earliest stages of querying is resetting those expectations, because I think everyone dreams about that story
And that's
in different variations.
Never, that's probably like 1 in 500 or 1 in 10,000.
Oh, yeah.
That something like that would happen too.
And so getting past that, like, I think it's good to have that hope, especially when we're writing. But then you have to switch and say, okay, I'm no longer an artist now, I'm a business person. Like, separate from the art so that they don't affect each other. Because taking those emotions into the querying process will make it impossible. You know, if you're still that close to the manuscript as you were when you were writing it, then hearing no over and over and over, it feels like they're saying no to you as a person. No, you're not good enough. Instead of, this just isn't right for me right now, which is what we have to hear if we're going to get past it.
And that's all any of them are saying.
Yes.
That's all any of them are saying. So, and it sounds impossible, but like you're agented, I was agented. Carrie, were you agented?
No.
No? So you've gotten through a lot of the query processes.
Yeah.
So it's not impossible. I mean, there's only, you know.
Still have some books I tried to get an agent with and they all said no, but I'll drag them out of the slide. When I finish the one I'm working on now, someone's waiting on, so. But,
So it sounds impossible, but it's not. So, yeah,
Just have to.
especially if you have a good query letter.
Yes. That's the thing. It doesn't always make the difference, of course, but having the strong query letter, it gives you a chance. You know, if you don't have the strong materials, then it's a definite no, because they're not gonna read your manuscript to know that.
What would you say about a publisher who just simply says, I would like to talk to you about a book I have written, you know, and then that's it. They don't even get, you don't even get a response.
You mean you send a query and never get a response?
No, yeah.
Yeah. There's a whole slide in here on that. Yep, it sucks a lot when you're on the other end of it, but that's one of the things that we just have to steel ourselves for, because that's the way of it. It seems ridiculous when you think about it in terms of like, they don't have 2 seconds to just send me an email that says no. But if you have 14,000 of those, then yeah, that adds up pretty quickly. And we have to remember that reading and responding to queries is not their main job. Agents are taking care of their clients. They're submitting to publishers. They're handling they're doing all the things that we want them to do for us. Reading queries and requests is something that they usually do on nights and weekends. Like, this is extra. And I think when we frame it that way, it gets a little more understandable that, yeah, it's rough, but
They're not answering your queries, which is, I understand is common. It's always reminded me of Jimmy Buffett's song, if the phone doesn't ring, it's me.
yes, that's perfect. And you know, it's so different. We're in such a different world now. When I started querying, you had to print off a little piece of paper, and it was a query letter that you folded up and put in an envelope, and presumably somebody received it and opened it up and read it, and then decided to either call you or throw it in the trash. Now it's so much easier to query and so much easier to just click away. And those are fueling each other, because you know it's easier to query, so they're getting more queries, probably from people who may not otherwise query, perhaps should not query. So it is just kind of a product of the environment. So that brings us to prepping the query. Like I said, this is not really a query writing deal, but since it's so small and we're not pressed for time, do feel free to stop me, ask questions. How many of y'all feel really comfortable writing query letters? No.
I did, because I had
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I always say, like, writing a book does not prepare you to write a query. Not in any way. Have y'all had the experience of like researching how to write a query and seeing all of this conflicting stuff and being super confused? Yeah. One of the biggest reasons for that is because of how quickly the industry is changing. You know, if you didn't pull that blog post from 5 years ago, it might no longer be relevant. There's also, you know, a lot of it is clinging to conventions from when we had to fold up that piece of paper and put it in an envelope, because it's really different when someone is sitting there holding a physical letter. They're probably going to read it. Like, it would be a little bit odd to open it up and read the first couple of lines and then just throw it away. Not to say that didn't happen, but it's a lot less likely to happen as opposed to if you're sitting at a computer and you can just click through your emails. So that has probably been the single biggest driver of like the change to the querying method in the last
15
decade, yeah. So that is generally when I'm looking at writing queries and my particular method, because everyone does have, some things are objective and then some things are more subjective. So I'm telling you my method, what I have found works or has worked for the majority of my clients. That is the driving force behind my method, is making it hard for them to click away. So, anatomy of a query letter. At the very top, we have the salutation. Obviously, we're still going to be, we're using technology, but we're still civilized. So we say hello. We have the specs, which I'll talk about placement of that later, but the specs, that's going to be your genre, your age category, and your word count. So all those things are critical. The hook, which again, we'll talk about that more, but the hook is just 1 to 2 sentences to draw in an agent. The mini synopsis. How many people feel like I know what that term means? 100%. Okay, cool. The biggest thing that I emphasize with the mini synopsis is that the mini synopsis in your query is not the same as the plot synopsis, the separate item that you will send to an agent when requested. The mini synopsis has a very different purpose, and it should be written very differently. So we'll go into that. The bio, which is basically just answering the question, why are you the right person to write this book? And then the closing. Thank you for your time. Here's how you can reach me. Again, just being civilized or pretending to be. All right, so rather than going in order down the page, we're going to kind of hit this with the bulk of the query being the mini synopsis. So we're going to talk about that first. Generally, the mini synopsis is going to be about 3 paragraphs, something like that. When writing a query, I generally open a Word document, standard, Times New Roman 12, so you know what you're looking at. And the whole thing, ideally, you want I'm talking salutation, closing, everything. Ideally, the whole thing should fit on about 2/3 of that Word document. Do not, under any circumstances, see a page 2. That's your hard line. If whatever you need to cut to keep it to 1 page, cut it. This is going to vary, of course, sometimes, especially if you're looking at like fantasy or sci-fi, things with a lot of world building. It can be harder to get it if you're working with dual POVs. It can be harder, but ideal is 2/3 of the page. Max, hard max is 1 page. And with the mini synopsis, it is not a play-by-play of the plot. We're not thinking about the plot at all. We're thinking about characters, and we're thinking about the conflict. The mini synopsis, above all, should be focused. Razor sharp focused. We're getting at very specific points. There are a few points that all agents are looking for in the query. And it's kind of those things that you can scan a query and go, I don't see that. We're out. So we want to hit those points. But I like to think of the mini synopsis and the query in general too, as you're not trying to condense your book down into a page, because that's not possible. You are basically writing a piece of flash fiction that goes along with your book. Like the query, when you're finished with it, it should feel like a piece of work in its own right.
Would you say that one way to describe the mini synopsis almost might be the same thing like a blurb on the back of the book?
Yes. Very, very similar. Very similar.
Because when you see that, it'll tell you basically who the main characters are. I know in romance fiction, which I've published in, someone's gonna wanna know who the hero, who the heroine is, what the problem is that's not gonna get them, so they're gonna have to overcome to put together. But even in things like Norman Roberts, in-depth series, if you look at the synopsis, it always, everyone knows who the heroine is, because she's written like, I don't know, 50 of them. Now, it's just about, okay, here's Eve again, this is what's happening, this is what the problem is, this is why she's in danger. And that's basically, if you look at those, that's to me would be, because I was rereading one the other day, that tells me everything I need to know about this book and why I really want to read it.
Yeah. Very, very similar. There are slight differences because your target audience is slightly different. But if you model your mini synopsis after what you're seeing on back cover blurbs, you're going to be way closer than a lot of, like, the majority of query authors. So definitely. So before I kind of go point by point, I just want to, the most important thing is the conflict. And I think we throw that word around so much that sometimes we stop losing, or we start losing sight of what it really means. At its core, conflict is just a character wants something else is in the way, and if they fail, something happens. So if you know those three things, then that's your focus. That's what you're modeling your synopsis around. And you will find, I find this in query coaching sessions extremely often. If you're having trouble nailing down that specifically, and then a couple of these other things that I'm going to talk about, you might need to take a look at your manuscript. The process of writing a query will show you potential flaws and issues in your manuscript. I have seen that happen often. A lot of times I'm asking these questions and the author will sit there and say, well, I don't know. It's like, well, that's a problem. That means that your manuscript, if you can't answer it, then a reader certainly can't answer it. And if a reader can't answer it, then they're not going to be invested. So definitely something to keep in mind. And I generally like to recommend having an open mind during this process, because if it does reveal something that could be a weakness in your manuscript, then that's a bonus. You just found out, something you need to work on that's going to make it stronger. So, inciting incident. I'm sure that's not a new term. That's generally where the mini synopsis is going to start, the introduction of the conflict. With that main conflict, the other thing that folks can have a tendency to do is want to cram in all the little tiny conflicts because they're important and they're lovely and that's fantastic, but you have 2/3 of the page. So figure out what that main conflict is, and everything that you include in the mini synopsis is centered around that. If it's not relevant to that, you don't need it. Kill your darlings, as Stephen King says. The basics, protagonist and setting, that's going to have varying degrees of importance depending on what you're writing. My focus is Appalachian fiction, so setting is very important. I tend to take a little bit on that, but the same as when we're writing, show don't tell. Try to incorporate those details as organically as possible. And sometimes it is truly a matter of one word here, 2 words there. Because when you only have a few sentences, every one of those words matter. So you are really working with with a scalpel when it comes to writing a synopsis. Stakes. How do y'all feel about that term? Clear or fuzzy? Pretty clear? Okay. If there aren't stakes, no one cares. I mean, to put it bluntly, that's the reality of it. If you think about any book that you read and loved, any movie, any play, any story ever, if there are not consequences to a character not achieving their goal, no one cares. There have to be consequences. Stakes need to be high and specific. Saying if the character fails to, I don't know, find the amulet, then the world descends into chaos.
If Frodo doesn't destroy the ring, Middle Earth will no longer exist. Pretty high stakes there, you know? The world is waiting on Frodo to get him out, didn't throw that ring in.
But Frodo also risks losing the people he loves.
Mhm.
So that is, when looking at stakes, I say, think about the stakes for the larger world, the larger community. Don't discount that, but also think about the stakes for your protagonist or your character. Yes, really bad things might happen, but what is really, really driving them? Could it be, a sense of a lot of the time it is has to do with how they feel about themselves, and digging into those very specific, very individual stakes makes it a lot easier to connect with the protagonist and to care on a deeper level as well. So, yes, stakes, high and specific. Ending the mini synopsis. So we don't give away the ending, right? The most common thing I think with finding the place to end the mini synopsis is cutting it just a little bit too early. So we want to go right up to that point where the stakes may or may not be realized. So a lot of the time, the easiest way to think about that is your climax. If the character does not XYZ, then blank happens. That's the biggest thing, because we want to leave the agent wondering, will it happen? Will they succeed? Will they fail? And of course, we want them to care. So don't mentioning extraneous characters, especially by name. Again, they're lovely and wonderful, but keep it focused. Don't begin too early. So same rules as writing the actual manuscript, right? So we want to cut up as close to that inciting incident as possible. Ending too soon without the stakes and giving a play-by-play. So it's not the same as your plot synopsis. You're not going, play-by-play. Even thinking about it chronologically isn't always necessary, especially if you're working with structures like dual POVs. You might have to get a little bit creative about the structure, and that's fine. We're not saying this happens and then this happens, and then this happens. We're saying, here's the conflict, here's what they want, and what they have to do to achieve it, here's what's standing in their way, and here are the stakes if they fail. Now, don't you want to know what happens? So that's the basics of the mini synopsis. This. Okay, so any questions on that? We'll keep going.
Do you always want to end on a cliffhanger? Do you ever want to, hint at or even say what the resolution is going to be? No.
Not the final resolution. Sometimes there are kind of small points that we do have to resolve to clarify what's going to happen. But the final resolution, nope. Always letting them request that manuscript to find out. Let's take care of it. And the other thing about the mini synopsis is it is an opportunity to show your voice. And I'll see authors a lot of the time in the specs or in the bio telling about this manuscript features like it's humorous or it's telling about the voice or the tone directly. Why are you telling the agent about your voice and tone when you have these beautiful paragraphs here to write and display your voice and tone? So that's very good to be cognizant of. It can, again, be very challenging because you're working in such a tight format, but that's where just one word, one little phrase, sometimes you can get across a lot with that well-placed word. Okay, the hook. The hook can be the worst part, to put it bluntly. It can take as long sometimes to write and be happy with the hook as the whole rest of the query. The hook is not strictly necessary. If you write a query without a hook, the query police are not going to come track you down.
So this is, I'm sorry, this is separate from the mini synopsis.
Yes, yes. Technically, I separate it. It is basically you have your hook, which is 1 to 2 sentences, and then go straight into your mini synopsis. But it has such a different purpose. It can be removed and not affect anything. If you can't come up with a hook that is strong, I generally say just leave it out. It's not worth having something subpar there because that's going to do you more harm than good, because this is the first thing that the agent reads. Even though we do want to say hello, they probably skip it. So this is their first impression. So the hook is, again, 1 to 2 sentences, 1 to 2 lines, very, very brief. Right before the mini synopsis, it should be unique. Is the biggest, if while you're writing the mini synopsis, the word in the back of your mind is focused, while you're writing the hook, you're thinking unique. What is going to grab their attention? The hook, I generally like to tell people to think about imagery from your story. Think about scenes or very specific moments from your story that are truly unique. If you were going to try to convince someone to read your book and all you could do was give them just a little snapshot, like a little 3-second clip to convince them to watch the whole movie, what's it going to be? If you can tie the hook in to the main conflict, that's super. If it's unique, engaging, grabs their attention, and has something to do with that main conflict, home run. That's it right there. If you can get your tone in there, everything you can get into these few little words makes it even better. So,
do you ever use a tagline?
So a tagline, it's just a little bit different. I don't recommend it, and that's what you would more likely see on the back of the back cover of a book would be a tagline. That's more of a summary.
Yeah. You're
not summarizing. And nothing about the hook is summarizing. It's just whetting their appetite.
Okay.
It's just, wow, well, that's interesting. If that's interesting, then let's see. if the query letter is supposed to entice them to read the book, the hook is supposed to entice them to read the query. Basically, the hook is the query for your query. Here's my method. Everyone has different methods. Everyone's brain works differently. Here's what I like. First of all, prepare yourself. Be patient. It can be a process. And if you get in a hurry, you know, like I said, it's better to just not have a hook than to have a subpar one. Start by making a list of, like I said, if you were going to convince a friend to read this book, what would you tell them? What are the most interesting things about your story? Choose some of them, one or two, and just try writing hooks. Just try like anything, just brain dumping and see where you get. Sometimes it's, you know, writing something and then that jars something, and then you change one aspect a little bit, and sometimes it's just like on telephone, you know, to get where you need to be. When you're writing them, you're really just trying to get the focus down for each. You're not paying too much attention to the grammar or how concise it is. You're just getting the ideas into that format. And then when you see something you like, try to make it concise. How tight can you get it? Adjust, write as many versions as you can. I'd say when I've done this process, I've just filled up pages of paper with just versions and versions, and then, okay, here, this one looks like it's worth playing with, so let's go through it, and can we get anything in there? That's my process, until you find one that you're like, this is it, that's the one, right there. And sometimes you might have multiple hooks, and you might, you know, kind of A/B test them. Send out 5 queries with one hook and 5 queries with another hook, see if there's a difference. There is nothing wrong with that. That's why, you know, we'll talk about querying in rounds in a little bit, but it's good to have options around that.
Is there, do you ever query the same agent, like give it a year?
Nope.
So that's a door that's shut. You just assume it got there and they said no.
Yes, unless they explicitly say on their page that follow up with us after X amount of time, you know, then you can nudge and say, hey, just want to make sure. That's used to be a lot more common than it is now, since no means no most of the time, or no response means no most of the time. Yes, once you have queried an agent, the only excuse for querying that agent again is if you have A, new project, or B, you have revised that manuscript to the point that it is basically a new manuscript. And even then, you still want to mention, hey, I sent this to you then, but it's undergone such massive revisions that
It's a new book.
it's new, yes. That's why, you know, when you're working on your query, it's so important to get it as strong as possible, because every time you send out a query, that bridge is burned. Yeah. Okay. So with the hook, I know that that's kind of devastatingly vague, but by its very nature, it is pretty impossible to kind of give a format for writing a hook, because it wouldn't be unique.
But we know what it's not. So we know what it's not.
We know what it's not, and that, you know, that's half the battle.
Yeah.
So, okay, focusing on imagery and senses, I find is the best way
Yeah.
to kind of hone in. But yes, any questions on it?
I've heard in the book to never ask a question, making a statement. Is that correct?
That is correct in as much as any advice is about this is correct. meaning that it's not usually the best idea, but nothing is true 100% of the time. Nothing that I am saying today is true 100% of the time.
If it's unique.
Well, maybe if your question is setting up something, I was just thinking 2 sentences for a book I submitted to an English publishing company or something. If I were going to put it in 2 sentences, since the heroine, basically, there are 2 murders in her village. She goes home for the summer vacation and she finds 2 bodies. She finds them both. I was thinking, second sentence would be, can she find the killer before she becomes the next victim? Because the killer knows that, finds out that she's a reporter, so he's thinking, she's snooping, she's probably out there for, you know.
So here's my standard advice on that sort of thing, like that being one of many kind of scenarios where you would have that kind of question. Can you rephrase it or reframe it without it losing anything? If so, you didn't need a question. Sometimes, like in that one, I would say she will have to find the killer before she becomes victim.
I think I did that version too, so.
So that's generally like if avoid it unless it is truly, unless you have exhausted all other options, put all other options against it and they fall flat. At that point, it's kind of like prologues. Like, if you remove it and it doesn't lose anything, then you didn't need it. So that's generally my for that. The one I will say, I feel like I can say this with a blanket. If you start the question with, what would you do if? Don't do that. Don't do that. That's,
It'll work there.
yeah. That's been, some things have just been done to death at this point that it's just, and it's kind of like starting with, it was a dark and stormy night. It's just an immediate eye roll. It doesn't matter if it was a dark and stormy night, just pick different words.
You know, the man that wrote that sentence was actually the author of The Last Days of Pompeii.
Not really.
I ran across
It
that
was a
as
dark and
kind
stormy
of thing.
night.
100 stupid trivia things you might need to know.
Just for the stipulation, you had it locked and loaded. Okay, so anything else on the hook before we talk about the bio?
I think, I mean, I can throw an example out there. My first book, my hook was, if research were food, Andrea Keller would be very, very fat. Because she's an archivist, and it goes from.
So that's great. So that's
yeah.
such a good example because that, I mean, we just got a sense of this character. We got a sense of the tone. It's short. It's quick. The hook should give more than it takes. It should give that sense of the story. And yeah, great.
Just one other little question about the book. Would you ever literally call out in a query letter, this is the book? You know what I mean? Or should it be more
Like
organic?
label it?
Like it's the, you know what I mean? Like literally label it the book, the book, you know, whatever. Like, or should it just be organic, where it's basically the first couple sentences of a letter style query letter?
It should be organic. Yeah, it's just, and the format is standardized, so, or should be standardized. The idea that, oh, I'm going to do it differently, so I stand out with your writing. Don't stand out with the format. That's, you know, we've been there. Yeah, a lot of, and they say some of this is, I don't want to say irrelevant, but it comes with caveats now because even emails are becoming outdated. Most agents now are using submission portals where it will actually have a paste your bio here, paste your, and usually it'll just say query, and it's kind of up to you how much of the standard you follow, and that's a case by case. But in a typical query format, you don't label things, you just, the first line is a hook, and then we have, and as I said too, this is my structure and my method. Some people will tell you differently. Some people will tell you to put the specs up top, and I'm going to talk about after the bio why I do not like to do that. But yeah.
What do we put in the bio? I mean, do we need to put, what you published, what your I mean, how much is too much and how much is not enough?
Yes. So, all right, basics of what goes in the bio: previous publications, relevant degrees, relevant experience. So the basics. The length of your bio will vary significantly. It can be one sentence, it can be a chunk of a paragraph. If you do not have anything relevant to put in the bio, leave it out. It is kind of like a hook. It is not required. We are never, ever, ever, ever adding the query in any way, shape, or form.
So if it's your first book, you probably don't want to say, this is my first book.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. The other question that I get a lot is if you have self-published books, do you include that? And generally the answer is no. Again, not to be harsh, but they don't care. Unless you have sold like a massive amount of copies. In that case, yes, my self-published book, XYZ, sold 1 million copies. Yeah, that's great. That's good for them to know. But there are no gatekeepers with self-publishing. So just the fact that you self-publish a book doesn't mean anything to an agent, because yeah, it could be, yeah, there are no gatekeeper, there's no standard for that in itself to mean it.